So it's the night of the election, America facing the next 4 years of potentially a new president. America right now is at its most polarized right at the end of the election cycle. It has reached its peak, and everyone will wake up to a new America. Or does it? Does everything change and everyone go insane? Or is it just, as usual, one big giant nothing burger? Many of us, I think, remember the growth of Trump, the God Emperor Trump, the 4D chess player who can weave and intermingle political narratives deftly and sort of always he finds a way to get round it. He's always steps ahead of the game, right? And we all remember this during his first round of presidential electioneering. Um, Honestly, it almost seems like a different time. It becomes a trite kind of cliche, the good old days, but it really, in some meaningful way, that does resonate as true more and more. Even though it's only several years ago, it seems like a different reality. It seemed a bit more optimistic and hopeful, like the things could change, you know. But I mean, certainly less apathetic than today, right? People, I think, generally a bit more optimistic about the future of America and of the West. Um, there was also, the idea of like the term coined by Trump, draining the swamp. There was uh, the idea of potentially a kind of symbolic fight back, um, even perhaps legally, something that could really change and turn things kind of rightwards, more in the direction of traditional America. He became a kind of mimetic online god figure, really, a force that could turn the tide of the decline of Western civilization. He was poised at the apex of a gigantic tectonic shift, not just in terms of politics, but I think to an extent in reality itself, which to an extent explains the potency of the God Emperor Trump meme, right? And the power it still has and still does largely, at least to his followers. Um, it reflects this kind of the manifestation of perception as a new kind of reality, and that fueled by the kind of mass communication means of the internet, it creates a kind of hyper reality. The meme, the God Emperor meme, blends in with IRL meet space and just everyday conversation. Um, it helps form a kind of massification of popular opinion. And so perception, to an extent, does actually become reality. And alongside this comes the acculturation, or rather the growth of online subcultures, new spheres of influence galvanizing a new kind of political voice, partly shrouded in a kind of a layer of ironic defense. It gave the Trump election cycle a kind of meta, like layers of reality permuting and suffusing into the real world, um, and effectively becoming a kind of a real opposing force to the dying legacy media, um, effectively a voice of the unheard. Trump became a kind of meta representation, a kind of uh, a projection of a fantasized alternative to reality, um, an increasingly tyrannical, well, politically correct reality that stifles free speech and ultimately thought. Uh, and more than that, I think he represented symbolically a kind of fight back, drain the swamp. Unfortunately, uh, much to the disappointment, I think, to many of us, to the online writer in particular, he didn't, perhaps unsurprisingly, didn't quite manifest the lofty projections of the God Emperor meme. He didn't quite become that in the end. Um, Reality is ultimately reality, and there's limitations to what can be achieved in a Western, modern, liberal democracy. Collapsing though it is, there's only so far that any one man can go. He's ultimately bound to the lowest common denominator, to the mob, the mass of public opinion, and he effectively has to perform a kind of a grand balancing act on the greatest stage. He has to sort of quell and manage opinions from all different angles and peoples from all different cultures and sectors of political life. He has to kind of say to everybody and kind of make sure everything balances out. It's an impossible task. Um, he can't be seen as too extreme, and the kind of political extremity that would be required to sort of turn the tide of a collapsing, literally a collapsing civilization. It's not something he's ever probably going to be able to manifest during his tenure as president, if he gets in power, that is. Um, it's not just politics, it's not just top down oppression, it's the populace, the lowest common denominator itself that is the problem ultimately. Um, the populace itself is rapidly decaying and falling into a kind of progressive abyss, right? Um, and of their own volition, people have agency, they make their choices, they ultimately get to vote and are to an extent responsible for what's happening. It's not just also kind of liberal tyranny that's working against the West. Everything ultimately, whether it's top down or bottom up power that's causing the fragmentation of civilization, it's also a kind of a dark entropic force pulling away at the seams, you know, and that's its own its own problem that civilization has to sort of come to terms with. But that's for a different that's a different conversation. But the point is no one man can change that. Whether it's the meme, the hyper reality of Trump, the projected God Emperor, he can't turn the tide of the collapse of civilization. He's already the God Emperor Trump with his wings. He's already flown too close to the sun, and like Icarus fell to the ground already. With all these sordid exposés and so on, and all the rest of it. Ultimately, the centre cannot hold all the opinions he has to balance, all of the kind of power sources he has to manage. The centre cannot hold all of these that have been pulled in different directions anymore. The apparition of Trump is, the God Emperor Trump is ultimately just that. It's a meme. At the end of the day, it's an apparition, it's a figment. And ultimately, being just a man, he has flaws. He has his Achilles' heels. He's ultimately vain and wants to be universally liked. That's it. He wants to appeal to in a democratic manner, but there isn't a democratic solution to what is happening. Ultimately, he can't go all the way, and frankly, even trying to define what all the way means in terms of like changing you know, reversing the tide of collapse. You can't even define what that even means by go all the way. It's so monumental a challenge. The scope is just almost politically too big to fathom. He isn't the savior of America. Trump can't do it. He can't keep America great if he couldn't make it great the first time round. And just to compound the problems, any policies that potentially practically he could make to alleviate the woes, the problems that face Americana, just the normal American people, um, such as reducing mass immigration radically, or perhaps introducing remigration efforts, reversing progressive policies, can be undone by a subsequent liberal government. They can all be just changed at the drop of a hat, because that's just the way things are. For example, abandoning the Trans-Pacific Partnership that he did by imposing rather large tariffs on Chinese exports and so on, favouring kind of nationalist trade policies and local industries. That's good, but tariffs can be reversed. With legal immigration, for example, H-1B visas can be made more obtainable again. They can be made more practically reachable by skilled workers abroad, again, by following successive liberal government. So everything he does, doesn't matter how much he withdraws from NAFTA, everything he does can ultimately be changed by the next government. Cthulhu ultimately always swims leftwards. The current socio-political regime is going left and into the abyss. And yet, here we are. Trump is here again. He remains unmovable, indefatigable, irascible as always, defiant to the end, but perhaps looking a little bit warier these days. And I don't blame him, being perhaps a bit tired. We'll see who wins tonight, and whatever happens, personally, I believe that real change isn't possible at this point politically. I mean, you never know, but we'll see. I think the only real change that we'll see, as alluded to in my previous videos that you can watch on my channel, is the creation, the forging of a new society, effectively a parallel to the current system, a real alternative. That is the way forward. And all my future videos will go about explaining, or at least trying to explain, how we might start and how that could be possible. But I guess if Trump does win, then at least we can have one last laugh, right? We can laugh at Trump owning the libs, even if it's just for one more time. I guess we just take the W while we still can. Right. Take care. Have a good night. Catch you later.